Hello and welcome to Behind the Story. I'm Sebastian Gomes, an executive editor at American Media. Pope Benedict XVI has passed away, and we have a very interesting and insightful perspective to share with you today on the life and legacy that he left behind. But before that, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and comment below. Tell us how you're remembering Pope Benedict XVI and what impact his papacy has had and will have on the Catholic Church and on the world. I'm joined today by Father Tom Reese. He's a Jesuit priest and a senior analyst at Religion News Service. He's also a former editor-in-chief of America Magazine. That was before we had a YouTube channel. Father Reese's resignation from the magazine in May of 2005 was very much connected to Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, who had just been elected Pope Benedict XVI. And we will get to that. But first, welcome back to America, Father Reese.
It's good to be with you. Thanks.
Now, you first met Cardinal Ratzinger back in 1994, and at the time, he was the head of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, a very powerful arm of the Roman Curia that focuses on promoting and protecting doctrine. And you were there to do an interview with him. Tell me about that experience, what you learned about him.
Yeah, this is the period when, between the two times I was at America, the first time I was associate editor, then I came back as editor-in-chief. But between the two, I wrote 3 books on the organization and structure of the Catholic Church. And I had done one on local bishops, which was called Archbishop. Then I did one on the Bishops' Conference, which was called A Flock of Shepherds. And then I moved up in the hierarchy and thought, let's do one on the Vatican. And everybody said, it's impossible. No one will talk to you in the Vatican. And I said, well, let's go find out. So I went to the Vatican and interviewed all sorts of people. And one of them was Cardinal Ratzinger, who at the time was the head of the Congregation for Doctrine of the Faith. And he was extremely gracious to me when I came to interview. Actually, I was scheduled to be interviewed, and he got sick. And I was leaving the following week, so I was in a panic. I did not want to leave Rome without seeing him. And so I was able to arrange an interview 2 days later. And it was in the afternoon. And so I went in and saw him, talked to him about how he operated his congregation, what he did. And so it was a terrific interview, and I was really glad I did it.
Now, you were editor-in-chief here at America from, I think it was 1998 to 2005, is that correct?
That's right.
Okay, and it was some of the things that were being published here under your direction that actually caught the eye of then Cardinal Ratzinger, and it was shortly after he was elected Pope in the spring of 2005 that you actually resigned. Can you take us through the series of events that led to that, and what was it that was catching the eye of Ratzinger and people in Rome, and to what degree he was involved?
Well, when I came to America, I really wanted to raise it to a higher level in terms of participating in the discussion and debate about really important issues that were facing the Catholic Church in the United States and around the world. And so, we call ourselves a journal of opinion, and so I wanted to have diverse opinions. So typically what would happen is my first year, in fact, there were a series of documents that came out of Rome, one on bishops' conferences, one on ecumenism and interreligious dialogue, Dominus Jesus, these documents. And what I would do is I'd call around and I'd say, hey, who are the theologians that know about these topics? And then I would send them the documents and ask them to, okay, tell us what you think about them. I didn't tell them what to say. I just, I said, these are the best people. Okay. What do you think about it? Now, typically their responses were, these are, they enumerate the things they liked in the document. They'd say this and that, and they liked it. But they would also say, on the other hand, this and this and this, we don't like. And in fact, we think the church ought to be saying this. Well, that did not go over well with Cardinal Ratzinger and the Congregation for Doctrine of the Faith, especially when it was documents coming out of his office. So we began to get rumblings from Rome that they were unhappy with me. And we tried to respond to those. We pointed out that we, in fact, published Cardinal Ratzinger. We had a wonderful exchange between him and Cardinal Casper.
Another German cardinal. That's right.
It
was
another German cardinal.
On the nature of the church. It was a fascinating back and forth.
It really was. And both of them high-ranking Vatican officials. Right. And for me, that epitomized the kind of dialogue and conversation I wanted to have in America Magazine. But it became clear over time that this was not what Cardinal Ratzinger wanted in the magazine. And especially when we got into issues of gay marriage and other controversial issues, that got to the point where he said, Reese has to go.
Father Tom, I'm wondering what you think this incident that happened with America and your resignation actually meant for the church in the United States at large. I know there were a lot of different people who were commenting and speculating about what really happened, but just in terms of the theological development and people's understanding of being a local church, a church here in the United States, an American church, what impact the decision of Ratzinger and the Vatican to remove you actually had on us?
Well, I think it had a negative impact on the beginning of the papacy of Pope Benedict, because he was kind of on a honeymoon, and then this story broke. I did not want to contribute to that negativity, so I simply would not talk to any reporters or talk about my resignation at all at that time. In fact, members of the Catholic Press Association approached me, and they were getting a petition ready to complain and object to my resignation. And I said, no, forget that. I think, in my analysis, it's not really about me. I was simply an example of a pattern that Cardinal Ratzinger followed when he was in charge of C.D.F. I mean, the impact on theological development was much more important than just me. The fact that scores of theologians were told, no, you can't write about that. You can't publish. You no longer have a job at this seminary. This suppressed a lot of discussion, debate in the church, and I think this made us ill-prepared to preach the gospel in the 21st century.
That's so interesting. Everyone agrees that Benedict was a brilliant theological mind, a complex theological mind, and certainly his books and encyclicals and his many speeches that he gave attest to that. And yet it's interesting that during his tenure, when he was the head of the C.D.F. and then as Pope, that he seemed to have be resistant to this type of dialogue that you're talking about, which seems that it would be very constructive for the church to be able to talk about some of these things openly. Doesn't that seem like an odd thing? I mean, do you have any insights on what could account for that a person that was as kind of intelligent and deep and thoughtful as him would be a little bit averse to this kind of engagement on theological topics?
This is certainly, one of the most important questions about how you interpret Ratzinger, Pope Benedict. As a young priest, he was an advisor to German bishops who were pushing for reform at the Second Vatican Council. In fact, he wrote a very strong speech for one of the cardinals attacking the Holy Office, the predecessor of the Congregation for Doctrine of the Faith, in which he said that their methods and what they were doing was a scandal to the church. And yet, when he took over that office and ran it himself, he went after theologians much in the same way as earlier, as the Holy Office had earlier. I think, my lens for understanding him was that at heart he was a German professor. And he was, and he treated theologians not as peers, but as almost like graduate students. And he was going to correct them when they were wrong. He was going to point out what he thought were their errors. And if they didn't go along with him, they were going to flunk. And basically, that's what happened. He silenced people. He took away their right to publish. And I think this was tragic for the church, because the kind of creative rethinking of how we do church teaching, how we express it to people in our time, wasn't done during that period, because theological debate and discussion was suppressed. And I think that put back the church 30 years during the papacy of John Paul and Benedict. And, even before he became a bishop, before he joined the hierarchy as a theologian, he was not the kind of person that went to theological conventions to participate in panels and debates and discussions about theology. He didn't like that kind of rough and tumble of the academic debate. That wasn't the way he operated. And as a result, when he got the power, he was able to tell people, no, you can't say that.
We live in a very polarizing time, and like so many other things, I think it's, how people interpret the legacy of Benedict XVI will very much depend on their own perspective or their own worldview. For example, a person who's a little bit more conservative may interpret Benedict or look at Benedict as a great hero, a great champion of doctrine, of defending orthodoxy, understood as a strict kind of interpretation and application of Catholic teaching and practice. And then more progressive-minded people might look at him and just see, an authoritarian, someone who is quashing reform or quashing dialogue, as we've been discussing. Is it that clear to you, or is that an oversimplification of views of Joseph Ratzinger?
Well, I think, as a theologian, he had a lot of wonderful things to say. The problem was, of course, that he didn't allow other voices in the church to express their views and participate in a debate. I mean, theology cannot progress unless there's discussion and debate. And I think those people who write off his papacy also forget and need to acknowledge the good things that he did as Pope. For example, John Paul was terrible on the sex abuse crisis, really. He just couldn't understand it, didn't believe it was going on. It was Ratzinger who first acknowledged the fact that we had a crisis. He listened to the American bishops, and as prefect of the Congregation for Doctrine of the Faith, he, processed hundreds, if not thousands, of priests out of the priesthood, these men who had abused children. So he did a lot of good things there. He also began the real reform of the finances of the Vatican by making, by allowing Moneyval, which is an international agency that deals with money laundering, to come in and review what the Vatican has done. Nobody in the Vatican, except Ratzinger, when he became Pope Benedict, thought it was a good idea to have an external body come in and pass judgment on the Vatican.
And he must have been facing a lot of internal resistance to that.
Absolutely, but he did it. He went through and did that. So there were good things that he did that I think he deserves our thanks for.
Perhaps the most consequential action of his papacy was actually his resignation. This came out of the blue to most of us and ended up, producing Pope Francis, who we have now. But I'm just wondering how that resignation shaped the way that you understand Ratzinger, and what you think his resignation says about the way that he understood his role as Pope.
There's no question about it. 500 years from now, when in history books it will be recorded that this is a Pope who was the first to resign in the modern era and changed the face of the papacy because of that. This was totally unthinkable prior to his doing it. And thank God it was a man who was seen as a conservative who did it. I think, what does it say about him? I think it shows that he's a real man of faith. He trusted the Holy Spirit. And he was a humble man. He did not think, I have to be Pope or everything will collapse.
Right.
No, he said, I trust the Holy Spirit. When I reach the point where I physically can no longer do the job, then it's time for me to step aside and let the Holy Spirit choose a new person to be Pope. I think this showed Benedict, I think, at his best as a humble man of prayer and faith who was willing to trust in God.
His theological output was extraordinary and by no means limited to rigid doctrinal pronouncements. I was thinking as I was preparing to speak to you about that famous line from his first encyclical, Deus Caritas Est, God is Love, in 2005, when he said, I wrote it down here, being Christian is not the result of an ethical choice or a lofty idea, but the encounter with an event, a person, which gives life a new horizon and a decisive direction. I mean, he was a beautiful writer. If we look at his writings, and you look at his writings, which are many and very consequential, what stands out to you as perhaps the most impactful, or the document or the speech that will have the greatest legacy or lasting legacy of Benedict XVI?
Well, that encyclical, Deus Caritas Est, certainly is one of the top documents that he wrote. What was amazing about it is how well received it was, even in the secular press. I mean, one of the reasons was it was readable. People could actually read it and understand it. I mean, John Paul II, God bless him. I mean, you would fall asleep trying to get through those encyclicals of his. They were just too dense. I mean, they went, they'd have a sentence that would go on with 30 commas and 6 semicolons and a half a dozen dashes, and it was only one sentence. I mean, Ratzinger had a good style of writing, so he was clear in his writings. There was another, sometimes he would have these kind of firework explosions of one-liners that I loved. For example, his first Easter Mass as Pope, he preached, of course, on the resurrection. And in it, he has one line, which I wish he had developed, but he never did, in which he said that the risen Christ is the next step in human evolution. And I read that and I went, wow. I mean, Teilhard de Chardin was condemned by the church for saying that. And here, is this Pope who says this. And I think that that's, a theological idea that could be developed and produce a Christology that would be attractive to people in the 21st century. And so there were things like that Benedict did that I would love to see further developed.
That's a great point, Father Tom, and a good reminder to people who are watching that now the work begins to go back into his writings, into his books, into his homilies, and find those amazing insights that he shared with the world, and then to develop them in the life of the church so that he's not forgotten and that his legacy lives on in the church. Thank you very much. Father Thomas Reese is a senior analyst at Religion News Service, and you can follow him on Twitter at Thomas Reese SJ. And again, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and comment below. Tell us how you're remembering Pope Benedict XVI. And for complete coverage of the life and legacy of Pope Benedict, visit americamag.org. Thanks for watching.